Last week I shared an Instagram reel and a YouTube short showing off this adorable and practical little no-sew granny square zipper pouch. The feedback I got was amazing, and I got so many requests to make a tutorial for this little pouch. So that's why we're here. Hi friends, I'm Corey from Alpenglow Basin Fiber Arts, where I share all things crochet. If you're new here, I hope you consider subscribing and dinging the little bell so that you don't miss out on any of my future crochet content coming your way. To start off, I want to show you all the materials you'll need. I'll also leave the list as well as links to as many things as I can find down in the description below the video. All right, let's go. For this pouch, which is about 10 3/4 by 9 3/4 inches, I used approximately 255 yards of We Crochet's Cotton yarn. Next up, you're going to need a canvas or cotton zip pouch. And I have several of them here. I have the one that we're going to use in the tutorial. These three are from Hobby Lobby, and these three are from Joann, and they came as a set of 3. This large one is a great size for an iPad, for a Kindle, something like that. One thing I want to say about these pouches is that no two sources of pouches seem to make them in the exact same size. That's one thing I noticed. So this whole project is really more of a formula for how to make your granny square pouch with whatever size liner you can find. The other key ingredient that you're going to need is some fusible bonding web. I'm using a brand here called Stitch Witchery, and you guys look at how old this package was. This has been in my sewing kit for so long, like years. It's a heat activated adhesive, so you will need an iron to attach the pouch to the yarn using this adhesive, but it works amazingly well. And let me just show you real quick how tightly and how nicely this is attached. The other thing is, a lot of people like to use hot glue. I do not. I don't like how messy it is. I don't like the little strings that come off. It also creates hard spots and it can seep through your yarn. And I just don't like the look of it, but this really is amazing. If somebody told me that this was sewn to the pouch, I would have absolutely believed it, because you cannot tell at all, and it just holds so nicely. So I highly recommend. Stitch Witchery is one brand. There's another brand called Heat Bond. I've seen both of them. I think the Heat Bond brand is a little cheaper. I've not used it. I can speak for this super weight Stitch Witchery. It works great. The Heat Bond, I would absolutely give it a try, but again, I would shoot for that super weight, and that's the magic. All right, and then beyond that, you're going to need a crochet hook. I am recommending a US G6 4mm crochet hook. This is from Clover. It's the Clover Amour. I love it. And you're going to need a yarn needle. And let me tell you, I highly suggest getting a yarn needle with a really big eye. So if you have to close one eye and squint, or if you have to put reading glasses on to thread your yarn needle, do yourself a favor and get yourself a yarn needle with a large head, because it will save you a ton of time. And then last off, you need some scissors, and I think that's it. So going back to the yarn, I just want to talk a little bit about the types of yarns that I think would work really, really well for these pouches. My main advice is to use natural fibers. So I'm using cotton. I love cotton for this project. I think bamboo, wool, linen, obviously, linen blend, cotton, all of those would work really well. Where I am a little bit nervous, but hey, we are going to test this out today, so stick around to the end of the video to see if it works. I'm going to be using some acrylic, and I've actually made up a small version of the pouch that will fit over one of my smaller liners here. And what I'm a little bit nervous about is adding heat to this acrylic yarn. We'll see if it works. I hope it will, because I know a ton of people have lots and lots of acrylic in their stash. And one of my biggest pieces of advice for this project is use your stash. We all have so many leftovers, and so often they just sit there forever. They're beautiful yarns, beautiful colors, and it's awesome to use them up. It feels so good, and you'll be very proud of yourself when you do. For this larger pouch, you can see I used 4 granny squares, and I wrapped those around the bottom. So we'll make those first, then we'll join them, and then we'll seam the bottom. We'll add a little edging around the top of the granny squares to finish off the edged look. And then we'll add these granny stripes all the way up to the top, finish off with an edging, and then we'll be ready to attach. I'm going to demonstrate a small granny square because once you get past round 3, it's just a repeat of the same process to grow your granny squares bigger and bigger. And I want to talk a little bit about the formula part of this. With every canvas bag, they're going to be a little different size. If I have my 2 granny squares, they don't quite reach the edge, so they're not quite large enough. We need our base, our bottom 4 granny squares, to be either about the same size as the pouch itself or just slightly oversized. And let me show you with a larger one here that we're going to ultimately put together. You can see I've got these 2 granny squares that actually are a great size, and this has 6 rounds. And you can see that they are slightly hanging off the edge of the pouch down here. I have nothing more to do. I'll just need 4 of these granny squares and then we'll join them up and keep going. On this little pouch, you can see that I do have a little bit of space on the edges. There's a couple ways to handle this. I could either go 1 more round of granny square, but then it's going to be really oversized and really hanging off because each round of granny square adds about 1 inch to the overall width of the square. The other option that I can do, because I don't need a lot of extra, is I might just put a single round of single crochet around the outside of this granny square in order to just make it slightly larger. Another option is if you had a larger pouch, you could, let's see, maybe one like this. Say you wanted to make a pouch for this, you actually could just make 3 granny squares. Those would probably be just about the right size. And so then you'd have to double that up for the other side. So you'd have a total of 6 granny squares. So those are options available to you to make your granny squares fit the pouch that you have available to you. To start out, we're going to create a magic circle. So I just grasp my yarn between my ring finger and thumb, wrap it around my 2 fingers, crossing over, and then across the top, and I grab it with my pinky finger there and pin down that yarn. And then I go under the first loop, grab the second one, and twist that as I come around, like this. And then I just reach over and create a chain with that yarn that I've been holding over here. Okay? So now we have our magic circle, or magic ring, and we're ready to get started. I'm going to make this a little bit smaller because it gets a little funky to hold it if it's too big. And to start out, instead of doing any chains to make that first double crochet, I am going to make a standing double crochet. And to do that, I simply insert my hook in the ring and pull up a loop as if I'm making a single crochet. And I go ahead and complete that single crochet. And now I'm just going to plunge my hook right down into that front loop of the single crochet, yarn over and pull another loop up. And then I've got 2 loops on my hook, yarning over and completing that. And that is a standing double crochet. It will serve as our first double crochet. And for this round 1, we're going to be placing 12 double crochets in our magic ring, separating every group of 3 by a chain 1. All right, so I've got 1 here. Let's put in 2 more. A double crochet is just yarn over, pull up a loop, yarn over, pull through 2, yarn over, pull through 2. Once more, yarn over, insert, pull up a loop, yarn over, pull through 2, yarn over, pull through 2. So I've got 3 double crochets. In the world of granny squares, this is what I'm going to call a granny group. And every time we make a granny group, we're creating one of these little fans here that serve to make up the look of a granny square. So to turn corners, we're going to use a single chain, so one chain, and that will always turn our corner. All right, so we're going to make another granny group. One double crochet, two double crochet, three double crochet. All right, and again, we're going to turn the corner with one chain, another granny group, turning our corner with a chain, and our fourth granny group. And all this time I've been crocheting over that tail. That is important. I should have mentioned it at the beginning of our magic ring, but you do want to crochet over that tail so we can cinch it closed. And we are at the end of our fourth granny group, and we need one more chain to turn that final corner, and then we will join to the original standing double crochet with a slip stitch, and we will chain one, pull that up tight, snip that off, and I only leave about 1.5 inches to 2 inches of a tail when I finish off each color. And now we have this wonky looking circle. We're going to flip it over to the back, grab onto that tail, and give it a nice pull to close up the center of our round one. So now we have our groups of our granny groups. There's one, and then we have our chain stitches in between that separate each of those 4 groups. I want to show you how I weave in, and this is probably the most difficult weave in at the beginning here, is just this center one. I learned this technique from Tony from TL Yarn Crafts. She's amazing with granny squares. And what I do, based on her advice, which I think is fabulous, I go ahead and thread up my needle, pull through just one little loop of yarn at the bottom, and then feed that right back through that loop and pull that up tight. And I think I'm creating a chain stitch by doing this, but basically I'm pulling that in a way, when I tighten it down, that it creates a little knot in the yarn and it prevents that center from opening back up in the future. We don't want that opening back up and creating a hole in our project. That is the way to do it. And then after that, I just weave, or I just force my needle underneath some of those loops in the middle, pull that through, and snip it off. And this will be on the back side of our work or on the inside of the pouch, so you'll never see it if there is a little tail that's peeking out. So you can leave it like that. Okay? Now I'm going to flip back over to the front side. To weave this and every other round after this last tail that I just come back here and I start threading my needle back and forth through the back loop of my stitches. And I do that until I've gotten, I don't know, 6, 8, 10, I don't know what it is. I don't really count. I just kind of fill up my needle, my yarn needle, either until I can't go anymore or until there's enough stitches that I think it's going to bury most of this yarn. And then I just actually, and this is why I like the big eye needle, I just thread my yarn in at that point. Sometimes you have to twist it to make it a little thinner, but not most of the time. It goes right through. Yep. So I just thread my yarn through the needle, pull it through, and then I stretch my work back out. And most of the time that completely swallows up that end. And then that end is going to get worked over and incorporated into the square as you move along through your granny square. They're nice and secure. They generally don't poke out afterwards. If they do, you can snip them. But that's a great way to yarn or to weave in that yarn really quickly so that you're not spending all your time weaving in ends of a granny square, because that's super annoying. All right, so that's round 1. All right, to start off round 2, we're going to use this pink color And we're going to create a slip knot and put that right on our hook. And then we're going to tighten that down, and we're going to create that same standing stitch in order to make our first double crochet. So from our little round one, we need to locate one of those chain stitches on the corner, and there it is. And I'm going to insert my hook into that chain stitch. And now, as part of my method of weaving in the tail, I'm going to hold both the working yarn and the tail, yarn over and pull up a loop. And then again, holding those two yarns, I'm going to yarn over both of them, oops, and then pull those through to form a single crochet. Okay, now I only have a little bit of tail left, and we're going to work right over the top of that. And that first tail is going to be all woven in for us. We don't have to go back and do it later. So we're going to complete this standing stitch just like we did before, going into that front loop of the single crochet, and now yarning over with our working yarn and pulling through. And there we have it. We've got our first standing stitch, which we're going to call our first double crochet. And so we're going to complete this granny group, working right over that tail with 2 more double crochets. And because we started in a corner, that means we're in a corner. So we need to turn the corner with 1 chain. All right, and then we need another granny group right into that same chain that we've been working in that corner. And there is 2 granny groups separated by a single chain stitch, and that forms the corner. Now we're going to jump over to this next open chain stitch, and we won't do any chains. We're just going to go straight into it with another granny group. And this, because we are working in a chain 1 space, we are in another corner. So we've got our first granny group. We're going to chain 1 to turn the corner and put in our second granny group. And there you go. We've got 2 corners on round 2. And now we're going to skip over this next granny group and start working in this chain 1 space, adding in another granny group. Just like before, chain 1 and another granny group right in that same chain 1 space. And then we've got 1 corner left over here, 1 chain 1 space. So we're going to put a granny group in there, chain 1, and 1 more granny group. And that's going to bring us to the end of round 2. And then we're going to come back over here and we're going to join to that standing stitch, which is a little bit lower here on our work. We're going to join to that first standing stitch with a slip stitch to finish off that round, and then we're going to chain 1, pull that up, snip it off, and then let's take a look at the back of our work. There's 1 little tail sticking out from that pink yarn at the beginning of this round, and we can snip that right off. All right, we're all ready for round 3. All we have left to do is to weave in and out of those back loops of our stitches, filling up our yarn needle with a bunch of stitches. Twisting that, pulling it through the eye, pull that right through, stretch it back out. So that's it, there's round 2. For round 3, we're going to be using green. And once again, we're going to create a slip knot on our hook and choosing any corner. Always going to start every row in a corner. We're going to make our standing stitch, again holding the tail and the working yarn together on the hook, pulling them through as if to make a single crochet. And then now we're only working with the working yarn, going through that front loop of our single crochet, pulling up a loop, and then yarning over and pulling through what's left on our hook to make our first double crochet. And then working over this little tail, we're going to create again the two granny groups separated by a chain one to turn that corner. Okay, we have our first corner in there, and now we're going to place one granny group in the side between the two corners of our square, and that will create the first side granny group in our square. In doing that, we did not do a chain one between our granny groups from the corners to the side. We only do that chain one when we're in a corner, and that's where we're going next. We're going into a corner. So again, no chains here. We're just going to create a granny group, a chain one, and a second granny group to turn the corner here. And that's how round 3 is going to continue going until we get back to the beginning. We're going to be creating a single granny group on the side of each leg of our square, and then we're going to be doing the two granny groups separated by a chain one in the corner stitches, and we're going to work that all the way around until we get back to the beginning. All right, we're back to the end of round 3, and again we just join in the top of the first stitch with a slip stitch, chain one, pull up a couple inches, and there we have our square. We're going to just quickly weave back and forth through the back loop. Put that through there and stretch it back out. And there we have round 3 complete. Once you start getting beyond row 3, anytime you're working on the side, you're just doing a single granny group. And then when you get to a corner, you're going to do the two granny groups with the chain one in the middle. And that's how you keep building that granny square to become larger, is you just keep going, and each side of each round gets larger and larger. So now it's time to join our 4 squares into a row, and I have a couple of them already joined here so you can see what they look like. We're going to be using a flat slip stitch joining method. I have a slip knot on my hook. We're all ready to go. First thing we're going to do is locate our first stitch. So I've got the chain right here. We're going to be working in the double crochet right next to that chain. We're only going to be working through the back loops. We're going to go from the top down into the back loop of the first stitch on one side, and then we're going to locate the corresponding stitch on the other side, and we're also going to be working through that back loop on that stitch, only in those back loops. And we'll do that with every stitch across until we get to the end. So I've got my slip knot on my hook, and I'm going to go locate that first stitch and insert my hook into that back loop. And then I'm going to curl this underneath, because we're going to be working over the top of the working yarn. We're not going to go under the working yarn. We're going to walk over it and keep that working yarn below our 2 squares here. So it's almost like doing a surface stitch on them. So there's our chain here, and there's that back loop of our first double crochet on the other square. So I've inserted in both of those, and now I'm going to yarn over, yarn over and pull through everything. And sometimes on this very first stitch, it can be a little tricky. So you might need to pull that loop up, and even this last loop, sometimes it's hard to get in there. So I've got my first slip stitch right here. And we are making slip stitches, so as is kind of normal with slip stitches, you want to make sure you're not pulling them too tightly, otherwise your seam will pull in and look a little funny. All right, so we're into the back loop on the next stitch. And again, working over the top of our working yarn, we're going to go into that back loop on the other side and yarn over and pull through everything. All right, there's 2 slip stitches. It's a little awkward for me to do this on camera for some reason. All right, there's a third one. Back loop on one side, back loop on the other side, yarn over, and pull through everything. All right, and keep on going right up to the very last double crochet on this side of the square. Do not put a slip stitch in final chain 1 spaces. And there is our chain 1 on this side and the chain 1 on that side. So we have 1 stitch left. Going into that last stitch, pull through everything, and there we go. We've got our join. At the end here, we're just going to chain up 1, pull it up an inch or 2, and snip the yarn. And just like we've done before, we are going to come across here with this blue yarn in edging. So we're going to go ahead and weave in just as we did before. So if you have a different joining method that you enjoy using with granny squares, you can use any method you want. That's the beauty of this project. You're sort of the designer, right? This is just a formula. You can use any colors you want. You can use any joining method you want. It's all up to you. But I really like this one. It's nice and flat, it's subtle, and it's really pretty. We're back with all 4 of our squares joined and all of our ends woven in on the edges there. And now we're just going to bring these together like this, and we're going to seam this last row just as we have all the others, so that we'll have a loop like this that will fit around the bottom of our pouch. Okay, so let's get that done and meet back up. So after we weave in these ends, then we will be working together to seam up the bottom of our pouch. But to do that, the first thing we're going to do is just fit this on here to make sure everything is good. And I like to position my square right here in the center. So I just fold my grannies on the edges so that we get half a granny, and then 1 full granny on both sides. You could, if you prefer it, you could just do 2 granny squares like this. Again, this is design choices that you get to make. I just think these look like a couple of eyeballs staring at me, so I prefer to have the 1 in the center and then the 2 on the sides. To do our seaming on the bottom to close the bottom of our pouch, we need to locate the center point of the square that is being folded in half on the end here. And if you were doing it this way, your center point would just be one of the seams. But since we're doing it my way, I'll show you how we do that. Okay, so if we look at this side of our square, you can see we have our granny groups here, here, and here. So our center point is this little space between these 2 granny groups. If we were only doing a 5 round square, then our center point would be the center stitch of these 3 in this granny group right here. So you can see that alternates every other row. Okay, so we're going to work our first stitch right into there. So I'm going to open this up, fold it over, and I'm going to join to that space with a standing single crochet And again, working over both my tail and the working yarn for this stitch. And now I'm just going to run my hook into each of the stitches across from one another. So here I've got this stitch and that stitch. I'll do a single crochet here and then in each stitch across until we get to the join. Okay, so I've got my first one, and now we're going to go into those 2 stitches to make a single crochet, making a single crochet in the next 2, working over that tail, single crochet in the next 2, all the way up to that center point. And you'll notice that I've got some of the blue yarn weaved into these stitches on the other side. Just don't pay any attention to that, just work underneath it so that you catch it as you're working across. All right, so we have worked through the double crochets, the 3 of them that were in that corner, and now we're up here to this chain stitch in the corner. So we're just going to keep right on going, and we're going to work right into that corner chain stitch, and then we're going to place a single crochet right into that joining seam that we have there, and then another one in that open corner stitch, the chain 1 space on the next square. And that's how we're going to work over those seams there, is we're just going to place a single crochet right into the end of that seaming row so that we blend it right in. So keep going all the way across. I have 1 more set of stitches right at this end, and I'm just going to stick 1 more single crochet into the end there to finish that off. Okay, chain 1. Actually, I'm going to pull a little longer loop for this one because we're not going to be working over this tail anymore. So this is a tail that I'm going to truly do a full back and forth weave in along this blue line here to hide that in our work. Okay, and that seams up the bottom of our bag, and you can see we've got a really great fit. Okay, our next step now will be to put that blue edging around these top stitches to even this all out before we start our granny stripes. Okay, so to do that, we'll get our slip knot on our hook, and here we can really just start anywhere. So I'm going to start on the back, and I'm going to join into one of the double crochets here, this one. I'm going to insert, yarn over both the tail and the working yarn, yarn over both the tail and the working yarn again to create that standing single crochet, and then drop that tail so we can work right over that. And all we're going to do here is work all the way around. We're not seaming anything now because we need this to be open, but working all the way around our squares in single crochet stitches. Now the key to this row is that we need a multiple of 3 stitches when we're done. And so naturally each of our granny groups is going to give us 3 stitches. I think I stuck a chain stitch in here. That was a mistake. Or am I in a corner? No, I accidentally stuck an extra chain stitch in here. I'm just going to skip over that. That should not be there. Okay, so that'll just disappear. If you notice that where you have an extra chain stitch in there, for some reason, if you forgot, then again, just as I did, skip over it. Won't hurt anything, you won't notice it. but we do need multiple of 3 chains, or a multiple of 3 single crochets when we're done with this. So if I would have crocheted into that chain stitch, my stitch count would have been off. All right, so again, our granny groups will give us a multiple of 3. But now we're at a corner. So I've got my open chain stitch here in the corner, and then I've got my seam, and then I've got an open chain stitch here from the other corner because we didn't seam those corner stitches. So we're going to take advantage of those 3 spaces to make 3 single crochets, one in the corner, one right here in the seam, one right here in the corner. And there you have it. That helps us to maintain that multiple of 3 that we need as we work our way around. We'll do that at every join of the squares. Okay, so now I've got my next 3 grannies, or my next 3 double crochets. So we're going to work in that first one. And make sure when you're coming off those corners that you don't accidentally cover up that first double crochet and miss it. So I've got the next 3. And we just keep on going around like this. Okay, I'm coming up to my last corner here. I've got my corner stitch, the seam, this corner stitch, and then I've got 3 more double crochets before I join this round. But it is very important, as I said, to have a multiple of 3. So I'm just going to pause here and count to make sure I have multiples of 3 coming up to this point, because I know I have 6 stitches left to put in here. If for some reason, because I made a mistake somewhere along the way, I have a multiple of 2, then I could take advantage of this corner area here to sneak in an extra stitch, or maybe even take one away if I felt like I needed to, but probably I would just add an extra stitch in order to correct that stitch count to make sure we have that multiple of 3. That's one way to quietly fix a little error if you have one. I'm going to finish up the corner stitch, the seam stitch, and the other corner, and then my last 3 single crochets. And I do have that multiple of 3. Then I'm going to join into that first single crochet with a slip stitch, chain 1, pull up, and snip off that end. Okay, and then I'm just going to weave this right into here because we're going to be working in these stitches. I'm going to do it with my easy weave, and down here I'm going to do a full weave, and then we will start on our granny stripes. Okay, we have our edging done, everything's woven in, and I'm on the back side. You can kind of tell the difference between the front and the back because of that bottom row of single crochet that we use for the seam. They're a little bit bigger on the back side. Okay, so to do our first granny stripe, I'm going to use the same color as I used for the edging. It just looks neater that way. So we've got our blue yarn and a slip knot on our hook. And I am just going to choose one of the seams and join into that single crochet that we put into the seaming stitch. Okay, so to do this, we're going to do it just like we did when we were making the squares. We're going to insert, yarn over, and pull up a loop using both ends, the working and the tail. Yarn over, pull through with both of those ends again, and then we're going to drop the tail. We need a standing double crochet, so we're going to go back into that front loop of our single crochet, yarn over, pull through, and then yarn over and pull through all of the loops on our hook, and that's our first double crochet of a granny group. We're going to finish our granny group by working 2 more double crochets right into that same single crochet stitch. Okay, so we've got our first granny group. We're going to skip the next 2 stitches and we're going to put another granny group into the third stitch. There's 1, 2, 3 double crochets, all into that third stitch. And then we're going to skip 2 and do the same thing. Oops, got a yarn over. And that's how this round is going to work. We're going to put a granny group into every third stitch all the way around. All right, so keep going. You're doing great. And we'll meet back at the beginning when we get back to the beginning, and we'll join to this first granny group, okay? Creating my last granny group. And I should have 2 stitches left, which I do. And now I'm going to join with a slip stitch to the top of the first stitch of our first granny group. Chain 1, pull up a loop, and snip it to finish off, and then we'll do an easy weave of this end, and we'll be ready to start our next round. This next granny stripe round, round 2, is going to be the round that we will repeat for the rest of the project until we get up to the height that we need to finish off our project. Okay, so really this is simple. You already know what you're doing here. We're going to, I've got my slip knot on the hook, and we're going to join between 2 granny groups anywhere here on the back of the work. Create that standing double crochet stitch. That counts as our first double crochet, and off we go. We're going to create the rest of our first granny group here in this space. And then we're just going to create a granny group in each space between granny groups all the way around. That tail back there, trim that off in the back. And that's it. So we're just going to create those granny groups in each one of these spaces all the way around, join back up here at the beginning, chain up, cut, and then change colors, and keep right on going. And for this size bag, and actually this was a 3-weight yarn, and this one's a 4-weight yarn. So with a 3-weight yarn, I needed 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11 granny stripe rounds to get up to the height of the bag. But in this case, since we have a thicker yarn, what I will do is, as I get up to where I think is close to the height of the bag, I'll just keep trying it on until I'm satisfied that we're up to where we need to be. And in this case, I can see already that we're not going to need nearly as many rounds. So as you plan out your colors, keep that in mind, kind of estimate how many rounds you need, and then space out your colors however you want. All right, so keep on going, making the granny stripe rounds, joining them, changing colors, or doing whatever you want color-wise. And when we get up to about the height of the bag, we'll join back up and we'll make one more round just to create a little bit of an edging, and then we'll be ready to finish off our project. Okay, we're back. And I'm done with my granny stripes. I wound up putting in 8 of those in total. And one of the things I've found here is that because my gauge is a little wider with the granny stripes than the squares themselves, I've got a little bit of a gap on the edges here. So I'm going to put one final edging row in before we attach the liner. But because it is a little bit wider and I want to pull it in, I'm going to create a round of slip stitches. Okay, so I have joined to the top of the first stitch with my granny stripe row or round. I've joined with a slip stitch, so now I'm going to chain 1, and I'm going to put a slip stitch in that very first stitch, and then I'm going to work all the way around, placing 1 slip stitch in every double crochet all the way around. Okay, I've got 2 slip stitches left, 1 and 2, Now I'm just going to join to that first slip stitch, another slip stitch, chain 1. We'll be ready to do our attachment, but before we do that, I want to do a quick fit check here to make sure that slip stitch row was the right decision versus just doing a regular single crochet. And yeah, that really pulled in those edges, so that's nice and snug around the top here, as you can see, so that's going to work out great. So I've got my iron warming up in the kitchen, and we'll move over to my countertop to finish up the attachment. Time for some magic. So I have pre-cut 2 strips of the stitch witchery that are just about the length of the inner pouch. So those are ready to go, and I'll set that aside. I have my iron all warmed up. I have it set for the wool setting, which is a kind of a medium heat. And then the other thing I've done is I've wet a tea towel that we will use over the top so that we're not working directly on the yarn itself, but we're going to iron over the top of the tea towel. All right, so all I'm going to do at this point is just stretch one of these strips of stitch witchery across the top of the pouch here, right up where I want to attach the yarn. And then I'm just going to slide everything up and get it lined up to where I want it. And that looks pretty good to me. And once you have it the way you like it, I'm just going to drape that tea towel right over the top. And the instructions say that you only need to hold this on here about 10 seconds. They do recommend using a steam iron. However, my iron is so old that if I put water in it to use it as a steam iron, all the water just comes trickling out. So I'm relying exclusively on my damp bar towel here to provide the moisture. Okay, I think that's been about 10 seconds. So we'll stop, pull this back, and you can see that is adhered. And I'm not going to tug on it real hard right now because it's still hot and I don't want it to come undone. But you can see that we've got this side attached. The yarn's in great shape. It smushed it down a little, but you can fluff it up. And now we're just going to flip it over and repeat the process on the other side. And hey, if you have enjoyed this tutorial, and the best way you can show me that is by hitting that like button down below the video, subscribing to my channel, and if you want to drop a comment in there, I'm super curious to know how you'd plan to use a pouch like this. Would you make them as gifts? Would you sell them? Would you, I don't know, what would you use yours for? I can think of a ton of ways I can use mine, but I'm actually more curious on how you might use yours. All right, we're all set to go here. And this is a little dry after using it, so I'm just going to pull it down a little further and give it another good 10-second steam. And there we go. Our pouch is attached to the liner. Super cute, right? I love it. And there we go. Okay, for the sake of time, I did the attaching of the acrylic yarn to a pouch off camera. But before I did that, I wanted to test it first. I had a scrap square that I messed up the color pattern on. I just grabbed a little piece of scrap cotton that I had and put some stitch witchery on there and ironed it down. I wanted to check to make sure that these fibers didn't get damaged, melted, singed, anything like that. And they didn't. As long as you have that nice wet cloth and you only work on it for about 10 seconds, it worked fantastic. And you can just see how strong this stuff is. I don't even think hot glue would hold it that well. I think this is really the better way to go, the stitch witchery super weight. That's good stuff. And so here's our little acrylic pouch. Everything is well attached, as you can see, and we are done. I just want to thank you for watching, and I hope to see you in my next video.